Hello, my name's Ellen. I'm a freelance film programmer for FILMCLUB, and this is Lily. She's one of our young ambassadors, and we'd like to welcome you today to another live webcast.
Hello, today we're going to be interviewing legendary filmmaker Werner Herzog, the director behind critically acclaimed films such as Grizzly Man, Cave of Forgotten Dreams, Encounters at the End of the World, and his latest release, Into the Abyss. Before we start, we'd like to just thank you all for watching and tuning in to today's live interview. Hello, Werner.
Hello, good afternoon.
I also just want to thank all the schools who sent in questions, and we do apologise if we can't ask them all.
Just to let you know, this interview is live today. It's going to be most suitable for key stages 2, 3 and 4. And because it's live, we'd love you to send in any questions you have via Twitter. It's @FilmClubUK, or you can email them to joey@filmclub.org, and Joey is Joey. And we'll ask them all at the end of the interview.
Right, so here we go. Our first question is from Flora from Aldenham School in Hertfordshire. Some people in documentaries say that they've been edited too much and that they don't recognise themselves anymore. Do you worry about this personally when you're making your films?
No, I know what I'm doing, and you see, you mentioned 4 films, but they're all documentaries, but I'm basically a feature filmmaker, or more at heart, and I stylize feature films. I stage some of it, I script some of it, so it's a different take on documentaries, and in this case of Into the Abyss, for example, none of the persons I ever met for this film I met longer than an hour, or even much less. So I have hardly any footage. There's something like 4 hours footage for an almost 2 hours film, so it's an unprecedented small amount. You cut away only the banalities and the introduction and things like that, and otherwise everything that I spoke and encountered is right in there.
Have you ever had any complaints from people that you...
No, and they understand that I'm a filmmaker and I'm a storyteller, and if something is way too long, I have no problems of cutting it down. So we are filmmakers, we are not just spectators in watching what people are talking in the street.
Out of interest, do you ever find that people aren't willing to be involved in your films?
Normally they are, but you have to approach them in the right way. Yeah. You have to take them seriously, and you have to respect them, and you have to find the right voice. And you have to find the right voice with a man who is on death row and going to die 8 days later. You speak differently with him than, let's say, with a family member of the victims.
The Roseland Community College and County Upper School would like to know, what kind of criteria do projects have to meet for you to want to make them?
There's no real criteria. You see, all my films have been projects where I immediately knew this is big and I have to do it. And I'm not really planning and criteria and planning career and planning long in advance. It's like uninvited guests. The films stumble into me, and it's like, I keep saying, it's like you wake up in the middle of the night and there's some noise in the kitchen and you surprise 5 burglars and one of them comes swinging at you. So you better deal with that one first, and you deal with the other one. So it's too many film projects lined up, and I haven't invited them, but I try to cope with them.
Okay. I think you've sort of just answered this, but David at Lawnswood School wanted to know, he's noted that filmmakers often start with documentaries and then move on to feature films, but you seem to have done it the other way around. Was there any planning there? Or was it
the other way around, yes. Yeah. I started with feature films, and I still make feature films, and now I have 5 or 6 feature films lined up, and only 1 documentary. And strangely enough, from doing films, I moved into writing as well. Now I have moved into acting, so I'll be in a film. I play a villain in a film with Tom Cruise, which will be out in about a year. It's called One Shot. Yeah. So, and it's a real badass bad guy, dangerous, vile and debased, and I'm fairly good at that. So you see me in other parts of what constitutes filmmaking.
As you've just mentioned, you've been an actor, a director, a producer and a screenwriter.
Yes.
Do you have a favourite out of these roles?
I like it all.
Okay.
Everything that has to do with cinema I love.
But you don't go to the cinema very much?
No, not really much, but I read. I read much more. I see 2, 3, 4 films a year. It's not really that much. However, I'm a working man. Last year I made 6 films and I run my own film school and I acted in a film, so it's not really too much time, but I do read, and I keep telling everyone who wants to make films, read, 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 read. If you don't read, you'll never be a real good filmmaker.
Why do you think that's so important?
Because you acquire a sense for great epic storytelling. You acquire a sense for conceptual things. And when you look at young people who are only on Twitter or Facebook, they cannot articulate 3 coherent sentences anymore, and they are very weak when it comes to conceptual things. It's a spontaneous thing, and it's not the depth of real reading. And you don't need to read books about filmmaking, read poetry or read whatever, just read. And some of the great filmmakers like Francis Ford Coppola or Terrence Malick or Errol Morris in documentaries, they read all the time.
That's some really great advice, and I'll probably take it on board myself.
Yes, read.
Okay, now we're going to show you the first short clip, and this is from Encounters at the End of the World, where we see Werner and his team learning skills to survive in Antarctica.
But before we could do that, it is mandatory that every inhabitant of McMurdo attends survival school before being allowed to leave. This 2-day exercise is called Happy Camper. Students learn to build survival trenches and igloos. The bad news is that night you have to sleep in your own construction.
As long as I end up with 10 fingers and 10 toes at the end, it's all good. Oh God, sorry.
What was your favourite encounter when filming Encounters at the End of the World? And that comes from Thomas from the Roseland Community College.
Well, when I went there, I decided it's impossible to describe a continent. I just wanted to name the glory of this place, of this whole continent, and the glory of the people who are working there. But I think my favorite, I like them all, but the favorite one is the one who has a welder who has these 2 fingers of equal length and these 2 fingers of equal length, and he shows it to us. And I leave him alone at the end, and he doesn't know what to do, and he's standing and looks at the camera and starts nodding and doesn't know what to do. And it's really very, very beautiful how he deals with it and how proud he is. He thinks he's of royal lineage of the Aztecs and the Incas. And I just liked him a lot.
Do you make friends with the people that you interview ever?
Well, short time, and it's obvious I'll never see them again because I work in Antarctica. It's fleeting, in this case, not solid, long-term friendships. Sometimes it happens, like a volcanologist whom I just met 2 hours ago for lunch, and I may do something about volcanoes one day.
We noticed that you always seem very calm in all these unusual places that you go to make your films. And we wondered, is there anything that ruffles your feathers, or do you ever get scared or anxious when filming?
Well, you can't scare me easily. The man who is going to frighten me has to be born first. But you see, I have been in tumultuous sort of filmmaking. I had to move a huge ship over a mountain with the assistance of 1,100 native Indians from the rainforest. And there was one catastrophe after the other, and I mean real catastrophes. We ran into a border war between Peru and Ecuador, and I had built a camp for 1,100 people, which was burned to the ground and attacked. And I had 2 plane crashes, and I had, I mean, you just name it. You have to stay calm. If you panic, 1,100 people with you will panic. So I've learned to deal with whatever is thrown at me. I will deal with it.
So it's just external calm, but inside you're panicking?
No, I do not panic. Not inside nor outside. I have a good take on real situations, and I can read dangers better than others that I know.
You do seem so at ease in these such incredible locations, and you're filmmaking, that's your job, essentially. Do you think if you weren't a filmmaker, you would want to be doing the same thing, but say, what would you do instead of filmmaking?
Well, you as a filmmaker or a future filmmaker, you will find your own way. But what could I do instead of making films? It's very hard to say. I may have become an explorer if I had been born in the 18th, 19th century, or maybe mathematics, but certain forms of mathematics, topology about distorted spaces, or algebraization of unthinkable curves in spaces. You can algebraically prove curves that are unthinkable or unimaginable.
Who do you think has influenced you personally as a filmmaker?
Not any colleague or not any other filmmakers in the past. Personally, you see, I almost had to invent cinema for myself because I grew up in the mountains, really remote, and for example, we had no running water, and there was no cinema, there was no radio, there was no telephone, and I did not know that cinema even existed until I was 11. And what may baffle you, I made my first year sitting with a man who made his first phone call when I was 17. So, and when I started to make films, I knew I had to invent cinema, as if I were the inventor of cinema.
That's quite interesting, actually.
And of course, I was never in film school.
So self-taught. I think now might be a good time to go to the clip, actually. Do you want to do that?
Okay, so now we have another clip, and this is from Werner's most recent film, Into the Abyss, and we will talk about this afterwards.
Michael Perry, we would like to offer our condolences.
I don't know what's gonna happen. We're gonna see. We're gonna find out. I'll find out on Monday.
So she let him in the house to use the telephone, and while he was doing that, Michael Perry stepped out of the laundry room. That's when he shot her. This was the vehicle that Michael Perry and Jason Burkett was after. 3 people died for this car.
If you are granted parole in 2041,
I'll be 59, 60. Long time.
I asked the jury to please don't kill my son. They never had a chance.
you did how many executions?
It was over 125. I can't do them no more. I'm done. Nobody has a right to tell you another lie.
I don't want to sound like an evil person, but I'm so glad I went to the execution.
I want 50 children. She wants 2.
It's right there. You can tell my baby has a nice, strong job.
I believe that, paradise awaits one way or the other. I tell people all the time, I'm either going home or home.
Now, Werner, could you please describe to us what Into the Abyss is about and what really drew you to this project?
In a way, it was kind of dormant. Actually, doing something about maximum security prisons was my first film project I had when I was 15, 16, but at that time I was a school kid and I looked like you. I mean, nobody would take me serious and throw serious money at me. I'm glad that I never managed to make it because it was very, very immature and very stupid. Really a stupid project. And I came across some correspondence from that time. It's just awful. Anyway, I think it was some sort of an American Gothic. I have been interested in Americana, like Grizzly Man, or now Death Row and Into the Abyss. And it was mostly the crime itself. And it somehow baffled me because this triple homicide was so unbelievably senseless, completely nihilistic. You see, when you have a bank robbery and somebody opens fire, yes, we do understand what's going on, but in this case, a triple homicide and the two murderers, 18 and 19 years old, that was really inexplicable and baffling and disquieting for me. And one of them, by the way, was executed only 8 days after I filmed with him.
Oh, really? Actually, with Film Club previously, I interviewed a man called Robert King, who's the subject of a documentary called In the Land of the Free. And in this documentary, you learn that he was in solitary confinement for 39 years. And whilst interviewing him, I got the sense that he'd grown in strength in this time and wisdom. Do you think you saw these qualities with Michael Perry and Jason Burkett?
Not really. They are still into this Perry was still in this kind of nihilistic mood and not accepting any responsibility. Of course, in my opinion, nobody should ever be executed. There shouldn't be capital punishment. But it's not that I'm commiserating him or I'm not chummy with him. I even tell him right away, the fact that your childhood was difficult doesn't exonerate you, and it does not necessarily mean that I have to like you. And he freezes for a moment, and nobody talks to him like this. And these men on death row, they can tell from a mile distance whether somebody is phony or not. And he liked me for that. So, but in your case, 39 years solitary confinement, it's an abomination. Nobody should be subject to that. No human being. You do not even do it with a dog or a cattle or anything. You just don't do it. And if he survived 39 years and grew in human caliber, it's absolutely astounding and unheard of. But it shows you how resilient human beings sometimes can be. But in this one case, which I do not know much about, I must say I bow my head in reverence to this man.
As you say, you made it quite clear from the very start of the film that you're anti-death penalty. I was wondering, do you go into your films knowing what story you want to tell and what point you want to make, or is there an element of it kind of unravelling as it goes along? Or?
Well, in this case, Into the Abyss, it was a voyage into the unknown, because I had 50 minutes with a man who would be executed and I would never see him again, and I never saw him before, so you never know what's going to happen and whom you are going to meet. I had a vague idea whom I was going to meet, but yes, sometimes I know more precisely what is happening, so you have to have a clear, strong vision. And sometimes you have to depart from it. For example, in this film, all of a sudden, during editing, it dawns on me and the editor, it's very much about life and the urgency of life. And we even made it into a chapter, but it was not planned during the shooting. It was in the footage all of a sudden.
Lily and I were talking earlier about how one of our favourite things about your documentaries is how you often let the camera linger on the subjects after you finish the interview. What is it that you're trying to capture in those moments?
Well, sometimes they're very revealing. When you leave somebody alone and there's silence, and silence sometimes gives you deeper insight into a person. In feature film, sometimes I really stylize it. I just have a recent feature film, My Son, What Have You Done, with Michael Shannon and Willem Dafoe and Chloe Sevigny. And there's a moment where there's a midget in a tuxedo in the largest tree stump on God's wide earth. I mean, it's gigantic. It's something like 30 people have to hold hands around this. It was felled in the 1860s. And there's talk about the tiniest horse in the world, and this midget riding it, and a gigantic rooster chasing them around. And all of a sudden a song starts, and it's Gaetano Veloso singing Cuckoo Paloma, a very emotional song. And the moment the song starts, all the actors somehow freeze. They slowly turn to the camera, and they look into the camera. They look and look and look, and the song is on and on and on, and it takes almost 3 minutes, and then the song is over, and they start again. So, I mean, it's completely wild. No studio in the United States or anywhere would allow you to do something as wild as that.
So you just like that moment with the camera? And
well, in this case, even more intense, because it's staged. It's absolutely staged.
Into the Abyss seems to be one of the more controversial and serious documentaries of yours. What effect do you want it to have on the people who see it?
Well, I'm a storyteller, let's face it. So there's a very intense story. There's a deep look into the deepest, darkest recesses of our soul. At the same time, very much about life and how we should appreciate that we can walk out into the park right after we finish. When we are done talking, I can sit down with people out in the park. And it's a phenomenal privilege. And of course, it's not an activist film. I'm not an agitator against capital punishment because I'm a guest in the country, in the States. And being German with all the atrocities of the Nazi time, you just can't be an advocate of capital punishment. But I wouldn't tell the Americans how to deal with their criminal justice. And what have I learned, or what did I want to show? That, for example, just this park out there is something magnificent. And one man in another film that I made, which is on TV, he was 23 minutes away from execution, and it was stopped. And they have to be transported from one prison 40 miles into another because there's an execution chamber with a gurney. And he sees from the van where they transport him, let's say a wrecked car somewhere in the meadow, a horse outside in a meadow, and he says it was all like Israel, it was all like the Holy Land. And all of a sudden I have the feeling, yes, this is, whether you like this corner of London or not, this is like Holy Land.
As a young ambassador for Film Club, I often conduct interviews, and I was actually kind of in awe of your interview technique in your documentaries. Do you think you could give me any tips, or any of the other young ambassadors?
Number one, I do not do interviews because I'm not a journalist with a catalogue of questions. You have prepared questions. I have none of them. And Perry, for example, who was executed, he thought I was a TV journalist doing an interview. I said, no, I'm not into that. I'm a poet. Can you take that? And he said, yes, sir. And so, and there's no technique. You have to know the heart of men to immediately find the right tone, the right voice, the right... I never knew where it was going to take me. So there's no technique, but what was helpful is that I have read in my life, and I'm conceptually thinking. And what has been helpful is that I have traveled on foot, and I mean really traveled on foot large distances, like 1,000 miles or so, for very important purposes. But I would travel on foot for the essential things in my life. I would travel on foot. So, and that has opened my eyes, and the world has revealed itself to me who has been on foot. So if you want to be a filmmaker, travel on foot. It's 1,000 miles on foot is more worth than 3 years in film school.
Okay. Should we go to our next clip? This is from Cave of Forgotten Dreams, and we see Werner here exploring the caves in southern France.
You see, in this big chamber, which is really huge, it's the biggest in the cave, there are no paintings, except right at the end. So this is probably relevant because when the entrance was still open, there must have been some light here. So they put the paintings really in the complete dark. You see, here. This is a cave bear painted in black.
The paintings looked so fresh that there were initial doubts about their authenticity. But this picture has a layer of calcite and concretions over it that take thousands of years to grow. This was the first proof that it was not a forgery.
A beautiful horse here, one of the most beautiful in the cave. And what is touching is that it looks as if it had been done yesterday. Look how fresh it looks with that technique.
Cave of Forgotten Dreams was your first film to be screened in 3D. How do you think the element of 3D is really impacting cinema today?
I think it's fading away already in a way, and I've always been a skeptic of 3D. In this case, of course, it was imperative. Nobody else will ever be allowed to make a film in there, and the formations in this cave are so significant because 32,000 years ago, the painters who did this utilized the drama of the formation. So, but all the 5, 6 other films I made since have not been in 3D, and I don't really see that I'm going to do another 3D film unless it becomes imperative.
Just while the clip was showing, Werner asked us to throw away our question cards because we're hiding behind them.
About techniques, yeah. My answer to it concerning you, it would be good, drop the cards, take the visors down and speak from your fascinations. Yeah. I see a point that you have cards because questions are coming in via Twitter. Yeah. Fine, yes, you need the card, but otherwise, next time, drop the cards and expose yourself, fortify yourself with enough philosophy to take whatever comes at you.
It might take us another 20 years.
Yeah. Well, in life, you are not allowed to have cards.
Yeah. Do you always just come up with your questions on the cuff then, when you're doing interviews? You don't prepare them?
In whatever I did in Into the Abyss, I had no question. I had one single question which I knew I would ask Perry. I knew he was going to be dead in 8 days, and I say, Mr. Perry, how are you doing? So that was the only question, and it's the first question I'm asking him. And that was all I knew I would ask. And then let it evolve.
Do you ever, sometimes your questions seem quite surprising or like even a little bit cheeky. Do you ever worry about offending people, or do you ever censor yourself?
No, I'm straightforward. I tell him I do not necessarily have to like you. In the prologue, there is a chaplain of the death house, and he came, quick, I have to be in the execution chamber in 30 minutes. And he starts talking to me like a phony television preacher, very superficial, and about the glory and the beauty of the golf course, and sometimes squirrels in the grass, in the dew, and sometimes he sees a horse or deer looking at him, and I stop him. And I knew I had to stop him, and I ask with a cheerful voice from behind the camera, tell me about an encounter with a squirrel. And he comes apart. All of a sudden, he's ripped out me, almost cries. But you do not learn that in film school or in journalist school or anywhere. It just came to me. You have to bring him onto the ground of the grim realities. But who else would have asked about an encounter with a squirrel?
Now, if we go to our last question, which unfortunately I have to use my card for.
Yeah, go ahead,
This
please.
is from Jamie at the Roseland Community College. He says, I've heard rumours that Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves would be interested in having you direct a third instalment of the classic Bill and Ted franchise. Is this true? And if not, would you ever be interested in doing something like this?
Well, they are wonderful actors. I don't know whether I would really fit into this franchise, but let's face it, the actors with whom I have worked, like Christian Bale or like Nicolas Cage or others, they are always very good in my films, Klaus Kinski, and they know it. And most of the actors in Hollywood really want to work with me. Eventually it will materialize in films, maybe with Keanu, whom I like a lot.
Now, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. I'm really sorry if we didn't get to ask your questions, but thank you for sending them in, and thank you especially to Werner for being here and being such a fantastic guest.
Yeah, thank you so much, Werner.
Yes.
It's great.
All the best to you.
Thank you. Luckily, we don't have to wait long for our next webcast. We're doing one tomorrow at 4 p.m. with Joe Dante. He's the director of Gremlins, Small Soldiers and the Whole. And we also have one on the 25th of April with Nick Hornby, the author and screenwriter. So please do send in your questions. You can send them to joey@filmclub.org, and Joey is Joey. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.